Hey Bookworms, it's Jade from Bedtime Bookworm. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to talk about the books that I read in the first half of April. The very first thing that I read in the month of April was Let's Pretend This Never Happened, a mostly true memoir by Jenny Lawson. I don't usually read memoirs, but this was a book that was picked for my work book club. I started out just reading this physically, and I had a hard time getting into it. I wasn't really grasping her humor very much. I was reading it before bed, and I would read like 2 or 3 pages, and I would just fall asleep. It just was not holding my attention. So I finally broke down and I got the audiobook version of this. Like a lot of memoirs, Jenny Lawson narrates this herself. It was so much funnier to hear her actually read the stories than to just read it myself. She definitely has a peculiar sense of humor that was a lot easier for me to find funny when I was listening to the audiobook than when I was reading it. One of the things I liked about having the physical book as well was that she put really funny pictures of some of the things that she talked about in the books. After I would listen to a few stories on the audio, I would go back and flip through the book and look through the pictures because they definitely enhanced my experience. I really love that despite all of this anxiety that Jenny Lawson has, she really learned over time to accept herself for who she is and just be okay with her quirkiness, which I think is something that a lot of introverted people can connect with, like I did. Overall, I really enjoyed this book, especially when I listened to it on audio, and I'm really glad that I read it because it's not something that I would typically reach for on my own, which is the good thing about being part of a book club. I gave Let's Pretend This Never Happened 4 out of 5 stars. The next thing that I read in the month of April was The Neverland Wars by Audrey Greathouse. I received an art copy of The Neverland Wars directly from the author, so thank you Audrey and Clean Teen Publishing for giving me a chance to review this book. This in no way affects my review of the book, of course. The Neverland Wars is a Peter Pan retelling, and I love Peter Pan. I read the original story years ago. I read it multiple times, actually. The Neverland Wars is about Gwen. She's a teenager who is kind of struggling with growing up. She doesn't know what the big deal is about growing up and why she would really want to be a grown-up. And her younger sister gets kidnapped and pulled into this war between the real world and Neverland. So the story is basically about Gwen trying to save her sister and about her struggle with growing up. After I read the sample, I immediately fell in love with the writing style. I thought she did a pretty good job of making Peter Pan similar to the original Peter Pan. He's kind of aloof and does what he wants, but at the same time, I kind of found him to be a flat character, and I wish he'd had a little more to him than he did. I really connected with Gwen, and I think a lot of readers will because she has a lot of introspection about, growing up and what does it mean to grow up and what do you really have to give up when you grow up. I think a lot of readers are kids at heart and will really connect with Gwen's struggle. The thing that I liked least about the book was probably the plot because this is a really character-driven book. I tend to like plot-driven books a little bit more, and there were many times while I was reading that I was just wondering, where is this story going? I don't see the direction that it's taking. I had hoped that the war between the real world and Neverland would play a bigger role in the story, but it felt more like it was a backdrop and not really the main plot of the story. And the main plot of the story is really just Gwen exploring herself and deciding whether or not she wants to grow up. Overall, I thought it was a good story. I enjoyed getting to know Gwen and I really connected with her, but I didn't love it. It wasn't as action-packed as I had hoped, but I think that a lot of people who enjoy Peter Pan retellings might enjoy this as well. I gave The Neverland Wars 3 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read in the month of April is probably my favorite book of the month. That is A Gathering of Shadows by Victoria Schwab. A Gathering of Shadows is the sequel to A Darker Shade of Magic, which I read last year and then reread just last month. This is the second book in the series, so I can't say too much about the plot, but this series takes place in a world where there are 4 different Londons that have a different amount of magic in each of them. The 2 main characters are Kel and Lila. Kel is an Atari who has a special type of magic that lets him move between between the different worlds, and Lila is a thief who befriends Kel by stealing something from him in the first book. I don't even know what to say about this book because it was so good, guys. When I went to the Victoria Schwab signing in February for the release of A Gathering of Shadows, Victoria Schwab talked about how she likes her second book in a series to be a lot more character focused than her first book, and that's definitely true for this one. I wouldn't say it was super action packed, but you definitely get to know the characters really well, and it still had plenty of action for me. I listened to this on audio, and I highly recommend that. I listened to A Darker Shade of Magic on reread on audio as well, and it was alright, but I didn't love the narrator. There are different narrators for this book. There's actually 2 of them. There's one for Kel, or one for the male voices, and then one for Lila, and they were both fantastic. I have the book physically, obviously, but I ended up just loving the narrator so much. I usually chose to listen to the book rather than to read it physically. Victoria Schwab is just amazing when it comes to the stories that she can craft. I loved how she was able to weave all these different character storylines together and have them come together at the end. I definitely didn't see the ending coming. I can't believe she left us hanging the way she did. I really can't wait to get my hands on the next book. I love the writing, I love the story, I love the world, I love the characters, I love everything about this book. I love this series, and I highly recommend it to any fantasy lovers out there. If you haven't read this series and you love fantasy, what are you doing? You need to go read this book. I gave A Gathering of Shadows 5 out of 5 stars. That's all that I read in the first half of April. If you've read any of these books, please share your thoughts with me down below in the comments. That's all I have for now. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bookworms, keep reading. Bye! Growing up in rural Texas, a lot of Jenny Lawson's why can't I talk? Book, especially when was an arc called
I'd love to, Jade, but I misplaced my reading glasses in another dimension.
Oh my god, that was hilarious. That's going in my bloopers. The next thing that I read in the munch people who to fantasy lovers out there, I highly recommend Bye.